It's a true honor to be here in such a spectacular building and with all of you here. I'm going to frame my answer a little bit first. So I was in Ukraine, posted 13 years ago, and then I came back to develop some of our first security programming with the annexation of Crimea. And I think of, we talked a lot about military defense, military equipment, and so on. But when we think of security, I also think about three very important things that we all assume those things, but I think we need to name them. So the first is human security. So the second one is culture. And the third one is environment. And let's look at what Russia has done just in Crimea. At least 224 people, and I think that's a conservative figure, are still missing, are still taken. Some charged, some not, some still missing. 60% of them are Crimean Tatars because they're considered a threat. Culturally, one of the first things that they did when they occupied was prevent Ukrainian language, banned it. And they limited Crimean Tatar language to maybe 30 minutes a day, if that. They destroyed cultural heritage. They built, from what I understand, right on UNESCO's sites, new buildings that don't even match, so they're trying to destroy the history. So we can't lose sight of that. And then the environmental damage. Just last December with the tankers, I believe it's some fuel that we've never seen. That was the first time that that kind of fuel hit the Black Sea or anywhere actually, and the damage it's doing. I mean, I understand that thousands of dolphins have died. So when we think of security, we have to think about all these things. And we think of how Ukraine and others are supporting them. We also have to think about what Ukraine has on its side. Of course, it has a fantastic Ukrainian armed forces. It has volunteers. But I think Ukraine still stands today because of regular people and how they stood up. And just yesterday, I met with leaders of organizations. All of them were really stepped up with the full-scale invasion, and some earlier I met them from Kherson, Mykolaiv, and Odessa. So I think that's the power of Ukraine, and that's the kind of activity that diplomatic missions, Canada included, and a lot of colleagues in the room here who represent their countries, we spend a lot of our efforts in making sure that we support those movements. Ukrainians are resilient. I mean, they are leading resiliency movements in Crimea, in occupied areas. Whether it's I think it's Crimean Combat Seagulls, or Atesh, or Slamauka, for which I got my tattoo, to support the women who are running information campaigns. Because we have to also remember this war is a hybrid war, a disinformation war. So that is something that we're doing. But going back to your question, in that time, I was also here to help stand up Op Unifier. So we were here in 2015, Canada, the Canadian Armed Forces, training and supporting the Ukrainian Armed Forces and building up their training, mentoring, and so on. And we have been here since then. We've now, as Canada, also worked side by side with Operations Reassurance. We have our new Prime Minister has just announced in his speech to the throne that our intention to join REARM with Europe. So we are clearly looking at ways to strengthen our ties with Europe, to support Ukraine as a European country. And so I think those are very important steps. I see defense and the economy as both a carrot and a consequence. So as the G7 presidency, this is something that Canada has led already on the foreign ministers level meeting, on the finance meeting of ministers, and Ukraine was there as well. What was discussed at all of these meetings and will be a core component of the G7 summit itself. And by the way, one of the first things that our newly elected Prime Minister did was speak to President Zelensky to invite him to the summit. So it's been made very clear that Ukraine will be still the focus. A strong and sovereign Ukraine is one of the main themes of the G7 summit. And at those discussions, it's also been made clear that they've talked about that the ceasefire has to be committed to by both parties equally. And they're talking already what will be done if it's not. So I think economic sanctions are very strong. I think capping the oil is something that's obviously discussed. Sanctioning the banking sector are going to be very important as ways of containing Russia. But they're also talking about how to further support Ukraine. And we're seeing a shift from a topic of donation to a topic of investment. And in part that's rearm, but we're seeing a commitment of what they're calling safe defense procurement, meaning we all understand Ukraine is less and less of a consumer of defense, and it's becoming increasingly a producer of defense. And so if we collect and pool our resources and our ideas and when work with Ukraine, invest in Ukrainian innovation, that's been talked about extensively here, I think we're creating definitely a very secure Europe with Ukraine. And of course, NATO also plays a strong part here. I'll just make one little mention. We have the Royal Canadian Navy, a diving team that is actually going to be helping on demining, for example, of the Black Sea and NATO waters. So, I mean, we can list many, many things. I'm just going to stick to those examples. But I think it's clear that Canada is with Europe and is with Ukraine. And it seems like Canada's very far away, but we also have our own motivation. The Arctic is a security threat itself. And both Canada, Russia, northern Baltic countries, northern countries of Europe, all have that to also think about and contain. So it's also in the security of the Arctic.